Decades before Marvel's Luke Cage was a hit Netflix show, or the film Black Panther smashed box office records, a black cartoonist created Eben, one of the first black superheroes to appear in his own comic book. The character was nearly lost to history until a pair of friends working under the moniker Black Kirby revived and reimagined the comic book as part of the art exhibit Ebon, Fear of a Black Planet.
Ebon, Fear of the Black Planet is an Afrofuturist historical account of one of the most influential black cartoonists of our time, Larry Fuller. And it's a reimagining of his space and a reimagining of his seminal comic book, Ebon. At the time that he was creating, only 3 African-American artists were part of the world-famous underground comics movement in the Haight-Ashbury back in the 60s. And it was Larry Fuller, Grass Green, and this gentleman named Ray Horn. It was during the age of McCarthy, they were saying like these comic books were like destroying the fabric of our country, that kind of stuff. So they forced American comics to self-censor. And so Larry was part of this underground movement. I found out about Ebon, not realizing that Larry Fuller had made this kind of groundbreaking, independent black superhero comic around the same time that Luke Cage was being created. Up until the creation of Black Panther, by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, 1966, you really don't have a predominant, very well articulated, black superhero that's in front in the mainstream. Over the last few years, a lot of my work has been associated with this cultural movement called Afrofuturism, which basically is talking about using speculative culture from an Afrocentric lens to kind of unpack our past and also really think about a technologically free future. And Black Kirby has been part of it since, I think, the last decade or so as well, me and my friend Stacey Robinson, as curators and as designers and as thinkers about this space and how it can empower us. In the 90s, it was a really interesting time around blackness in comics and Afrofuturism, right? Milestone Media was making comics, stuff like Static Shock or like Icon and Rocket and things of that nature. They get kind of folded into this notion of what we call Afrofuturism. But even before that, Ebon existed. When Larry comes along, he's inspired by, the first open heart surgery was an inspiration, and also the Black Panthers, actually. So he was politicized and thinking about representation in a particular way. And so the main character, Valentine Jones, is coming from that space. His story was extremely Afrofuturist because we're talking about an intergalactic, interstellar society, that can actually travel to other planets, right? And also the fact that this is a black planet, but they also have the spiritual aspect to it. There's these oracles and they have a religion and they have a basis of spirituality that kind of seems to be fueling what they're doing. A mystical heart of Jom is put into his body and then he gets these superpowers. And I'm like, wow. And so Larry was, wanted to tell a story of revenge. He was gonna be dealing with street criminals, that kind of thing. But when Stacey and I talked to him about it, it was like, well, what we're really talking about is a character more like Nova or like Space Ghost or like Captain Marvel, or like Adam Warlock, where he's in outer space dealing with cosmic issues, And so we started talking to Larry about what an issue 2 would look like, or what if we reimagined the character for current days? And he was generous enough to actually work with us on, putting together some artwork. And we just brought in our friends and we just started really thinking about what's the world look like, that kind of stuff. And that's where Fear of a Black Planet came from. When you come into the show, you're gonna see the original book. There's only about 100 or so of the original Ebon comic book published by Spearhead Press back in the 1970s. We have reproductions of the entire book that's actually scanned in from Larry Fuller's own collection. There's this organization called Black Comic Lords, and these are the most knowledgeable black men about comics you would ever imagine. And they were partially started because of a conversation with Larry Fuller about Ebon, right?
Like the way comics used to be, if you had Batman, you had your main cover story, and then maybe you might have a second story in there, a shorter story. Well, I got one of those, but I could, with a little tweaking, I could fit it into the continuity of the thing I'm working on.
What's wild is we actually got our hands on a rare plate of what would have been the second cover for the second issue of Ebon. One of them was actually looking on eBay and they bought this plate. They actually ended up gifting it back to him, and which is pretty amazing. So what I did is I took like a digital image of it, like a photo of it. I reversed it out in Photoshop and I inked it and made a color image of what could have been the cover. Stacy did a collection of collages based off the names and the ideas I came up with. I came with a creation mythology and everything. The other thing we have is a visual language. We actually have a language, a Night language. It's based off another project that I did with a dancer, where we actually like took Afro-Caribbean movements and we used lights all over her body and created these light trails. And I took those light trails and made a typeface, and that is the Night language. The other thing we have too is like Stacy created like what might be a landscape, for NIDA. We were just trying to figure out, well, what is the world like? A woman named Diana Dodo created a original figurine of Eben, of the original Eben, which is in the show. A gentleman named Otis Ardenberry from Buffalo, New York, created a series of Funko Pops that are actually the main characters that's in the show. And it's also, I love the fact that when you come into the space, it's actually like translated into Spanish, so it's like this kind of bilingual experience for the patrons. Larry getting his flowers and realizing like, yeah, you created this one-off that you thought was not was unsuccessful, but you've actually inspired like a generation of Black creators and collectors. It's pretty exciting.
It's wonderful. Ray Horn and I used to talk about, we're struggling now, but probably 40 years, 50 years from now, it's going to be some guy doing his PhD thesis, and he's going to do a thesis on these two Black guys in San Francisco. He did not live to experience all of the passion and commitment among the Black comic book collectors. He would have been beside himself.
When you put someone's image in a museum, you're basically saying that they're worthy to be shown, that they're worthy to have a narrative, that they're worthy to be archived, right? What happens when you don't do that? It basically gives people the mindset that person's life doesn't matter, that person's history doesn't matter, that they have not, contributed anything to the society. So we're trying to show the opposite.
You can visit the Eben Fear of a Black Planet exhibit at the UC Riverside Culver Center of the Arts until Sunday, June 19th. You can find out more at ucrarts.ucr.edu.